Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, by the SNP MP for Airdrie and Shotts, Neil Gray. Neil, how are you doing today?
Good evening, Kenny. How are you doing? I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Well, good to have you with us. And on the other side, we have from All Under One Banner and the newly formed Yes Alba group, Andrew Wilson. Andrew, how are you doing?
Kenny, good evening. I'm very well, thank you. Just to point out, the new organisation has no name yet.
Yes, we should clarify. Yes, Alba was just a provisional name, and that is going to be changed soon. So we will look forward to hearing when you finally unveil that new name. But we start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,239,579 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 1,137,207 were confirmed negative, 102,372 were positive. There were 897 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly, there were also 39 new reported deaths. Of course, this will be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will show symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get tested. As always, we urge you, if you are showing symptoms of a fever, a change in your sense of taste and smell, or a new dry persistent cough, that you do please book a test as soon as you can. And the same applies if you're in one of those areas that is currently doing some community testing. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 972 people in hospital last night, 50 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 3,989. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures published today show that 62,566 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 533 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And as at the 6th of December, 5,868 deaths have been registered in Scotland, where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate, according to statistics published by National Records of Scotland today. Between the 30th of November and the 6th of December, 232 deaths were registered, which mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, a decrease of 20 deaths from the previous week. Almost 3/4 of the people who died in the latest week were aged 75 and over, and just 9% were aged under 65. In the latest week, there were 38 deaths involving COVID-19 in the Glasgow City Council area, 31 in South Lanarkshire, and 22 in both North Lanarkshire and Renfrewshire. The majority of deaths occurred in hospitals, representing 145 deaths, with 78 deaths in care homes and 9 at homes or in non-institutional settings. And just to place these numbers in context, the number of deaths from all causes registered in the week ending 6th of December was 1,283, which is 13% higher than the average over the previous 5 years. And just before we get on to the rest of today's headlines, if you would like to join the conversation here, you can do so by following us on Twitter at BroadcastScot and using the hashtag Scotland@7. And as you can see, we will be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen throughout the show, so do please get in touch. But our first story, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is set for talks with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen over dinner around half an hour from now. Both sides have cast the meeting as a chance to unlock the stalled Brexit trade talks, but acknowledge there is a danger that there may be no trade deal in place when the UK finally leaves the EU's orbit on the 31st of December. Johnson said Brussels wanted the UK to comply with new EU laws in the future or be automatically punished, and was insisting that it give up sovereign control over British fishing waters. I don't believe that those are terms that any Prime Minister of this country should accept, Johnson told Parliament, to cheers from Brexiteer colleagues. Johnson said a good deal could still be done if the EU scrapped its demands, but that the UK would prosper with or without a trade deal. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said there was still a chance of a deal, but that the integrity of the EU's internal market must be preserved. If there are conditions from the British side which we cannot accept, we are prepared to go down a road which is without an exit agreement, she told the German Parliament. The main sticking points have been over fishing rights in British waters, ensuring fair competition for companies on each side, and ways to solve future disputes. Don't get your hopes too high here, Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney said. Failure is a distinct possibility. So, Neil, I'll come to you first on this. How likely a possibility do you think it is that the EU and UK fail to agree a deal at this stage?
I think it's still probable that we are facing a no-deal scenario, but even with a deal being struck, it's going to be a fig leaf. It's going to be a low deal. It's going to be something that is still far, far away from what we have been used to and what our businesses are used to in terms of the trading relationships that they have with the European Union. It's not going to be membership of the single market or customs union. And in terms of Scotland, that is going to put us at a competitive disadvantage to Northern Ireland, because we know now that Northern Ireland will be getting access to the single market and customs union, and still having access to the UK internal market, and so their businesses will be at a competitive advantage compared to Scotland. And so, as Ian Blackford rightly said today at PMQs, why is the Prime Minister choosing to shaft Scotland in this way? We voted to remain, and we're getting nothing out of this. So yeah, I think there is a possibility that there could be a fig leaf low deal that preserves some kind of semblance of saving the Prime Minister's grace, but I suspect no deal is still a high probability, and we shall wait to see what comes out in the coming days. But it's just such a mess, 22 days from the end of the transition period, and we're still talking about this. It's a complete nonsense and totally irresponsible.
Now, you mentioned Northern Ireland there. Michael Gove, of course, said yesterday that Northern Ireland was getting the best of both worlds, which seems like an odd thing to say for somebody who has insisted that the UK must leave the orbit of that other world.
And where have we heard that before, of course? That Scotland was going to get the best of both worlds by staying in the UK, staying in the European Union, and having a powerhouse parliament is what we were promised in 2014. And of course, that is total folly. Michael Gove and others are spinning like whirling dervishes, trying to get out of the situation that they found themselves in, and trying desperately to save face. But we are in a very difficult situation of their making, and thankfully we've got the lifeboat of independence, but we've got some work to do to make sure that we can get that over the line and take people with us. But certainly the next few days, I suspect, will be a turning point for a lot of people going forward, and we need to make sure that we take them with us.
Now, Neil, we know that certainly in the previous Parliament, there was quite a lot of opposition to the government, this reckless approach from a number of Tories on the backbenches. The 2019 election does seem to have cleared a lot of those out. Is there any voice now on the Tory benches at Westminster that's saying to the government, maybe we need to approach this differently?
There is still that element within the Tory backbenches, but you're right, it is greatly diminished. We don't have the Dominic Greaves, for instance, who led the charge on so many of these issues. But there are others who are challenging the government and telling them that failing to get a deal, no matter what it looks like, would be a failure in statecraft, which obviously someone Boris Johnson's ilk is not what he's wanting to hear. So there are still people there that are doing that, but I suspect that their voices will be rather drowned out by the large Brexiteer majority that there is in the Commons at the moment.
Now, Andrew, I heard somebody suggesting that the future of Britain's economy might rest on whether Boris Johnson could avoid accidentally groping Ursula von der Leyen over dinner. Do you think there is hope that somehow these two kind of major political figures can thrash out some way to make progress over dinner tonight?
Well, I think the point you make about Johnson's behaviour personally is absolutely right. That I'll not repeat any of the jokes that crossed my mind with regard to his behaviour, but I think some of the language the Prime Minister was using today, unsurprisingly, was unhelpful. I heard him referring to Ms von der Leyen as Commissioner von der Leyen, And by doing that, I think that was just plain dog whistling to his mad Brexit chums in attempting just to underline the point about the way in which the EU is a rules-based and democratic organisation. And so I think that kind of dog whistling in advance of what's meant to be a meeting and a discussion, it's not a negotiation tonight. I think, as ever, Johnson's language is unhelpful. Surprise, surprise. And yes, I think certainly from an Irish perspective, I'm seeing that they're suggesting that at best it's 50-50 as to whether there's a no deal or a thin deal. But the point that's being made, that Neil made, is absolutely right. Even if there is a deal, it's going to be so thin that it's going to be almost meaningless. We know that even a deal makes us worse off than we would have been if we'd remained in the EU in all sorts of ways. And it's very clear that from the government's behaviour, and in particular, England voted for Brexit and gets it. Wales voted for Brexit and gets it. Northern Ireland voted to remain and is getting to remain in many, many ways. Scotland voted to remain and is getting Brexit. So the behaviour of the government indicates how determined they are to disregard the wishes of the people of Scotland. And I think it's pretty plain that the people of Scotland know how much damage either a hard Brexit or a very thin Brexit is going to do. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't start to see people on the streets demonstrating against it as soon as Johnson announces what's going to happen.
Now, of course, businesses still have to adapt to all of this, whatever happens. How worried are you about the fact that we are now just 3 weeks away from whatever the outcome is, and there's still not clarity for so many of the businesses that are going to be affected? How long is it going to take us, do you think, to kind of adjust and to recover from the actual shock of whatever happens at the end of the year?
I think adjustments will probably take most of 2021, to be honest. I know that the Westminster government is only talking about bringing in certain checks on goods in the summer. So the first half of the year is going to be some kind of no man's land. And then the second half of the year is going to be adjusting to the rules that are brought in at that point. And of course, the impact on business cuts in two directions. Obviously, there are UK and Scottish businesses that are going to suffer. Scottish businesses that export to Northern Ireland still don't know what the rules are going to be, with 22 days to go. And also European businesses, and I'm thinking in particular of haulage businesses, they either don't know what they're going to do, or more likely, I think, especially so many European haulage businesses, the drivers are paid by the kilometre, not by the hour. And so if they're going to be stuck in queues, or if they're not going to be able to get through the border over the English Channel, they're just not going to come. So their businesses are going to be affected because they're not working in the they're not coming to the UK. We're all going to be affected because those hauliers will not be hauling food and medicines to the UK at all. And we know that the number of UK haulage businesses who have got the necessary paperwork already is about 10% of the total number of haulage businesses. So whichever way you cut it, it's going to be a disaster.
Well, we will, I'm sure, have a report on what the outcome of tonight's dinner is sometime on tomorrow's show. But we move on now, and businesses across Scotland will benefit from a new £185 million package of targeted coronavirus support. The announcement follows discussions with business groups and sees a wide range of sectors benefiting, from taxi drivers and arts venues to travel agents and hospitality. In addition, there will be additional one-off payments to hospitality businesses in January to help them deal with the traditional post-Christmas dip in demand. These will be of £2,000 or £3,000 depending on rateable value. The package was announced by Finance Secretary Kate Forbes, who also said she had written to the Treasury calling for Scotland to receive its share of rates relief reimbursed by supermarkets, to ensure this is spent on those areas hardest hit as part of Scotland's recovery from COVID-19. Now, Neil, a lot of the financial support from the Treasury has kind of been painted almost as some magical gift from Rishi Sunak himself. But in reality, obviously, you know, the Treasury is able to spend whatever it wants. Kate Forbes really has been able to do some fairly impressive work in finding money to support Scottish business in a slightly different way than the UK government is doing, isn't it?
Yeah, she has. She has deliberately made sure that she has provided the support as broadly as possible to make sure that as many different businesses and organisations qualify for it. And she's done it in a targeted way as well to make sure that it's targeted to those groups across Scotland that need it most, and in a way that is divergent, obviously, from some of the UK schemes. So I'm very pleased with the announcement today. The 195 million will be very well received in the business that I've been talking to, and I know certainly, special mention to the taxi drivers, for instance, who have really struggled, and I know this will be a very welcome step today, and I congratulate and thank Kate Forbes for it. But the second part there of your introduction is an interesting one about the letter that Kate has sent to the UK government about the rates relief, because of course Shona Robeson, who is the convener of the Social Justice and Fairness Commission that I sit on, had made that as a call at the SNP conference a couple of weeks ago, suggesting that it would be a good idea to, instead of pursuing austerity economics as a result of the COVID spending that has been necessary, that the UK government should really be looking to have a windfall tax on these supermarkets and others that have really profited, not just benefited, but profited from the rates relief that has gone on. And so I'm glad that a majority of those supermarkets have come forward now to do that voluntarily. But she's absolutely right, is Kate, that the UK government now needs to ensure that we get a proportionate share of that, so we can direct that back into investment in further business and other support going forward.
And Andrew, coming to you now, we did mention the recovery from Brexit, but the recovery from COVID is going to be quite stiff for a lot of businesses. Do you think this is going to be enough to tide some of those businesses over until sometime next year when we're all vaccinated and we can get back to something like normal?
I think, Kenny, the continued investment into all sorts of sectors, as we've been saying. I was struck to see indoor football centres and travelling shows being identified as through the sectors. And that maybe sounds clever, it maybe doesn't sound important, but firstly, these are businesses, they employ people. And secondly, they are two examples of something that makes Scotland Scotland, in my opinion. So making sure that those sectors are supported as much as possible is absolutely right. I think the investment just now, and I think there will have to be more investment, the support will continue, I hope continues to keep these businesses afloat, but only afloat, and that's all we can hope for. And the challenge is going to be that, in terms of the story with which we opened the show this evening, no sooner are we keeping businesses afloat due to, in respect of COVID, and Brexit's going to come along and put them right under the water again. So I think there's going to be a very long haul next year for lots of folks.
Well, we will obviously keep watching, but we move on now, and one of the reasons that we have Neil Gray on the show tonight. The SNP have called on the Chancellor to introduce a package of measures to boost incomes and tackle poverty, as new research revealed that more than 500,000 children are experiencing extreme hardship after a decade of Tory austerity. Neil Gray MP said the Tory government must finally take responsibility for plunging millions of children into poverty and hardship, after the study from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation revealed a staggering rise in destitution in the UK between 2017 and 2019. The report found that 2.4 million people experienced destitution in 2019, a 54% increase since 2017, including 550,000 children, a 52% increase since 2017. In addition, it found 1 in 7 people experiencing destitution are in paid work. The SNP's Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary said that while the Scottish Government had introduced landmark policies to tackle poverty, including the Winter Fund, the Scottish Child Payment, the Best Start Grant, the Baby Box, free school meals, free personal care, free prescriptions, investing in the Scottish Welfare Fund and mitigating the bedroom tax, the only way to truly build a fair and equal Scotland is with the full powers of independence. So Neil, I know this is all part of a kind of ongoing campaign for you, but are you getting any sense that the Tory government is listening now?
I don't know. I mean, I've yet to see a reaction from them to Joseph Rowntree Foundation's latest report out today and showing a stark rise in destitution. They like to talk about destitution and levels of absolute poverty. Whereas some others like to talk about relative poverty. They always stick to absolute poverty, which is a similar measure to destitution. So this, they can't even fall back on saying that levels of destitution or levels of absolute poverty are stagnating under their watch. It's not true. Now we can see clearly that their austerity programme, backed by the Liberals, is now showing its fruit, and it's horrible for so many households. Talking about 550,000 children in destitution, it's just a horrendous picture. And that is before we get COVID into the mix. So yes, it is part of an ongoing campaign. One area that I'm hopeful that we might be able to get a win, a U-turn from the government, is on the temporary uplift to universal credit. That £20 a week that was brought in earlier in the summer, £20 a week extra, is due to expire in April next year. We have joined forces with the likes of Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Save the Children, and a host of other organisations in saying that should be made permanent, and it should be extended to legacy benefits, because those legacy benefits that disproportionately cover sick and disabled people have not seen such an increase, and they have been adversely impacted through the pandemic. So I'm hopeful that we might get something there, which would save a huge number of further levels of poverty, particularly amongst children. The Social Metrics Commission has commissioned polling with YouGov that has shown that the temporary uplift, to be fair to the UK government, has saved a huge number of children, tens of thousands of extra children falling into poverty. So we want that to be saved, we want it to be kept, and we hope that will come to fruit. But there's a number of areas that we want to see changes in the social security system. We don't think that anything meaningful is going to come from this UK government, which is why we need the full powers of independence.
Now, you mentioned, obviously, this research is covering up to 2019, but COVID has seen even more people fall into destitution. Some of those sectors that we were talking about, taxi drivers, hairdressers, kind of arts workers very often, have all suffered really badly during the pandemic as well. Do you see any support coming for some of those groups that have been left behind?
No, that's another. We talk about the excluded, the forgotten. Even the small family-run businesses, the directors of family-run businesses that take their income through dividends. All of these people have seen a massive hit to their income. And normal times, they weren't making a huge amount of money in profit, and were just able to cover their dividends to be able to pay themselves a salary. And so many others, as you say, that have been excluded, self-employed and freelancers that have been left behind. And Rishi Sunak continues to ignore their existence and says that the UK government has been the most generous of any government in the world, and yet so many people have been left behind. It's really quite scandalous. So we're continuing to make the case. We continue to press them on it, but unfortunately, I'm not convinced that we're going to see any meaningful change from the government in the coming weeks and months.
And we mentioned some of the things that the Scottish Government has done to try and mitigate the effects of austerity. And this might seem a very obvious question to you, but for our viewers, what is the Scottish Government not able to do that you would like to see the UK Government doing instead?
Well, the Scottish Government can't borrow, so it can't borrow in order to invest in programmes that we would want to see. We can't print the money the same way that the quantitative easing that has gone on, but from the Treasury. So we are reliant on the spending decisions of the UK Government in order to inform our revenue at the Scottish Government level, to be able to inform and direct the programmes of support that we want to see. So that is the fundamental problem that we face in Scotland, and being able to take the economic side of the COVID problem going forward, and in terms of resolving the issue that we face with poverty levels. We know that the vast majority of those that are facing impoverishment and facing destitution do so because of the decisions that have been made at the UK government level, particularly around social security cuts, but also in terms of we don't control employment law to be able to ban the exploitative element of 0 hours contracts. We don't control the minimum wage, so we can't set a real living wage. All the Scottish Government has been able to do so. So there's a number of areas.
Now, Neil, I know we only have you until past, so I'm just going to move on to our next story now, and we'll get your comment on that one as well. Because a new report by the Resolution Foundation has found that the main support available for employees who need to self-isolate is statutory sick pay. But employees earning less than £120 per week do not qualify for it. That sees 1 in 4 part-time workers and 1 in 7 workers in retail, hospitality and leisure left with no income at all if they have to self-isolate at home. Responding to the report, the SNP have renewed calls for statutory sick pay to be increased in line with a real living wage and made available to all for 52 weeks, after it was revealed that the UK offers the least generous support of any advanced economy for people unable to work due to illness. The report also found that SSP offers less than a quarter of a typical employee's previous earnings, despite calls for this to be changed during the pandemic. And Neil, you were just saying there that the UK government likes to say it's the most generous. Here we see the Resolution Foundation pointing out that it's one of the least generous countries in the world at this. Do you see any movement again from the Tories on this issue?
This was one of the earliest calls that we made right at the start of the pandemic, that they needed to sort out statutory sick pay, that they needed to, I remember the questions being asked of Matt Hancock and Alex Sharma about whether or not they would be able to live off the 90 odd pounds a week on statutory sick pay. And they were told, and the answer, I think it was Alex Sharma that said quite honestly, no, he would not be able to live on that. So why on earth does he think that anybody else should be able to? And so we've repeatedly called for statutory sick pay to rise in line with the real living wage and to be more in line with our European counterparts. But sadly, it's fallen on deaf ears as yet, and I can't see changes coming, although that doesn't mean that we won't continue to try, and we certainly will, because this is a real problem going forward. I mean, the payments that are there for people who have to self-isolate both through the Scottish Government and the UK Government are good and seem to be working well, but it doesn't solve the problem long-term of the rates of statutory sick pay that need to change, and COVID has certainly shone a light on that, and the UK Government needs to act, and if they won't, then let us do it.
And Neil, we know that people in the lowest income brackets are more likely to suffer with COVID. Is there, I mean, I know you're not a public health expert, but is there any evidence that this is causing people not to self-isolate?
Certainly the reason why the £500 support payment was brought in was to make sure that people are able economically to do the right thing, because there was an understandable worry that people would feel that they couldn't afford to self-isolate. They couldn't afford to be away from their work, especially if they had an unscrupulous employer who wasn't willing to support them during that time. So that's why the payments were introduced. So I would suspect that, yes, there is probably a concern there, and I would always encourage people to do what they can to do the right thing, to seek their advice. If they're in a difficult situation, then to always get in touch with a member of the Scottish Parliament or member of Parliament, and we can certainly help in terms of pointing them in direction and support that is available.
Absolutely. Well, Neil, that is just hitting the half hour now. I know you have other places to be tonight, so thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for your time.
Cheers.
Really appreciate it.
So we move on now, though, and Nature Scot, Scotland's nature agency, has said the coastal sand dunes at Donald Trump's Aberdeenshire Golf Resort have lost their special status as a conservation body said that following construction of the Trump International Golf Links course at Menny, north of Aberdeen, the dunes no longer merit being retained as part of the site of special scientific interest. Nature Scot said that the sand dunes had been a high-quality example of a geological system characteristic of northeast Scotland. However, there is now no longer a reason to protect the dunes at Menny, as they do not include enough of the special natural features for which they were designated. So, Andrew, at the time that Trump was bidding to buy the estate at Menny, he talked about how he was going to fix the dunes, and this was some triumph for him. But of course, one of the great objections to the course was that this site of special scientific interest was going to be destroyed. How sad are you to hear this news?
Well, I think, Kenny, it doesn't come as it's certainly not a surprise. It's a huge disappointment. But as we know with the likes of Trump, where Trump goes, devastation and destruction follows usually, and whether that's through the electoral system in the United States or on the shoreline of Aberdeenshire, it's always the same with Trump. It's about destruction and loss, and so the especially in the context where it's suggested that he's intending to press ahead with building a second golf course at Meany. Uh, that on the back of there being no progress on any of the commitments that he made round about building housing, and that against the backdrop where it is now very clear that the resort at Meany has made absolutely no profit in the 12 years it's been in existence. So it is looking like a bigger and bigger white elephant or money laundering front. And all that the people of Scotland get is the destruction of their natural environment. So it's a bad deal that's gone that is producing even worse results than were feared in the first place.
And do you think this tells us something about how we approach this kind of investment? I mean, the big rich American coming waving wads of cash at people in the Northeast is something that we've seen with the oil industry and more for the last however many decades. Is this something where we need to sort of reconsider how we do some of these kinds of developments?
Well, certainly it's 2 or 3 weeks since I last watched Local Hero, which is I think what's probably in your mind with regard to the oil industry. I think the oil industry is a good example, perhaps, at least in the way in which the people of Shetland negotiated with oil majors when they arrived and wished to construct Sullom Voe. And the benefits and the protections that the people of Shetland quite rightly sought and obtained. So I think yes, the approach that we take. Well, there's two things. Firstly, Trump is always bad news, no matter what it is, and so I don't think there could be a spoon with a long enough handle in order to sup safely with Trump in any business or property development, and that is probably just a lesson that we need to remember again. And I think beyond that, there is definitely we have seen the pressure on the local infrastructure and facilities around the NC 500 over the summer as folks flocked to the north to escape COVID in the south. And so I think there is definitely a need for much greater impact and much greater care and much better protection to be afforded to our natural environment for as a result of any of these tourism or hospitality developments.
Mm. Well, speaking of Trump and some of the madness that surrounds him, Donald Trump has said he will intervene in a long shot lawsuit by the state of Texas filed at the US Supreme Court, which is attempting to throw out the voting results in 4 states that Trump lost to President elect Joe Biden. Trump tweeted, "We will be intervening," that's all in capital letters, "in the Texas plus many other states case. This is the big one. Our country," bold capitalized, "needs a victory." Sorry, I have to specify how Trump's tweets are written. The lawsuit, announced yesterday by the Republican Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, targeted the election battleground states of Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Trump has falsely claimed he won re-election and has made baseless allegations of widespread voting fraud. Trump provided no details on the nature of the intervention in the case that he was promising, including whether it would be his presidential campaign or the US Justice Department that would take action. Officials from the 4 states in issue have called the lawsuit a reckless attack on democracy, while legal experts give it little chance of success. It was filed directly with the Supreme Court rather than with a lower court, as is permitted for certain litigation between states. So, Andrew, we're seeing Donald Trump now. Well, this is actually the Texas governor that has directed this, but Trump now jumping in. And I'm not sure what the legal basis for this could be for Texas to demand that other states throw out their results. But it does look like a fairly desperate throw of the dice from the president, doesn't it?
Yes, Kenny, it is. I'm certainly not admitted at the bar in the great state of Texas or anywhere else in the United States for that matter, but I think it's tolerably clear that the state of Texas has no standing to interfere in elections that take place in other states. And so this is very much a long shot attempt. We know that I think there are at least the Trump campaign has lost at least 30 of the litigation that it's raised so far, and its legal team have turned themselves into a laughingstock in the United States, as I understand it. But it's not a surprise that I don't think it's the governor of Texas, it's the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who is leading the charge on this. And of course, as we know, Paxton is a proud little right-wing Christian soldier who has been endlessly fighting the culture wars, and this is just another facet of that. At the same time, of course, Paxton is very much in the Trump mold, not least because he too is under investigation by the FBI in several respects, and those investigations and criminal proceedings are ongoing. So the prospect of such an individual getting attention and wasting the court's time getting attention where none is due, attempting to justify litigation which, as I understand it, has next to no prospects of success, and that in the context where, as we know, Trump is now 7 million votes behind in the popular vote. It's another major distraction, whilst I suspect Trump and his family are unscrewing the light fittings and rolling up the carpets in the White House, ready for a moonlit flit on the 19th of January. And they're continuing to strip assets and make money as fast as they can, knowing that the game is up.
Now, we know that these legal attempts to challenge the results are pretty unlikely to succeed. As you said, most of them have failed so far. There's whatever comes up now is even less likely to succeed. But what do you think the long-term effects are of this kind of thing? Do you think there is a worry that 50 years from now we're still talking about the conspiracy theory around Trump's defeat?
Well, it's a very good point, Kenny, and I think the characterization of these activities by the president and by the Attorney General from the state of Texas and by Trump's legal team are nothing short of a reckless attack on the democracy of the United States of America. The democracy in all manner of Western countries, ours, Brazil, countries like India, has been under attack from the right wing for several years now. And this is perhaps the denouement or the last throw of the dice by Trump to do more damage to the democratic institutions in the United States, but perhaps with the intention of having another run in due course, or setting something up for another person like Trump to continue the program of cultural destruction and taking a hammer to the institutions which are necessary checks and balances in any democracy, and which are particularly necessary in the United States.
Well, we will obviously keep you updated on all of Trump's legal adventures and potentially illegal ones, but we move on now. And the head of Stockholm's health service has appealed to national authorities to send specialist nurses and other hospital staff as it struggles to cope with a second wave of COVID infections that has filled intensive care wards in Sweden's capital city. Sweden, which has not opted for the kind of lockdown adopted by most other European nations, has suffered many times more COVID-19 deaths per capita than its neighbours, with the total reaching almost 7,300 today. Stockholm and the surrounding region are among the areas hardest hit, with 2,836 deaths. Infection rates are picking up again after a lull in the summer and autumn, and intensive care wards are now full. We need help, Bjorn Eriksson, the Director of Healthcare for the Stockholm area, told a news conference. He said 83 patients were treated in intensive care in Stockholm. That corresponds more or less to all intensive care beds we normally have. So, Andrew, Sweden for a long time was the hope of people who are against lockdown, that they were going to somehow prove that no lockdown meant things could carry on more or less as normal. It doesn't seem to be the case now with full intensive care beds a couple of weeks into December. It's not a good sign, is it?
Yes, Kenny. I think we're seeing from Mr. Eriksson an indication of the kind of same concerns that are causing some comment in Scotland at the moment. The decision yesterday for Edinburgh to remain in level 3 was, as I understand it, taken in part by the Scottish Government on the basis that they wish to suppress transmission now, in the expectation that there will be greater risk of transmission as we get closer to Christmas. And I think the medical director Eriksson was making precisely that point when he said that that further restrictions and controls were required in the region of Stockholm, because the normal Christmas behaviours of going for drinks after work and crowding into warm, hot shopping centres and department stores would have, in his words, horrible consequences. And I think that is likely a similar perspective that's been taken in Scotland as well. So it's a huge concern for the people of Sweden, who, as you say, have had a relatively straightforward, pandemic, especially in the summer. And of course, we know in Swedish society and Norwegian society that being outdoors in the summer is a pretty significant part of cultural pastime. So, in a sense, it's not a surprise that that infection rates were that high in the summer, given the commitment to an outdoor lifestyle that many of the people of Sweden and Norway have. But now that we're into the winter, it's an entirely different ballgame. And I think what we're seeing in the region of Stockholm reflects that. They recognise that people indoors, mixing in warm environments indoors and damp environments indoors, is the equivalent of a Caribbean holiday for a virus like this. And so greater steps are required in order to prevent the infection running out of control.
Mm-hmm. And when you look at our system, you mentioned the restrictions that we have had. When you look back, do you think that in general the Scottish Government has made the right decisions, or do you think, for example, that we came out of stricter measures maybe a wee bit too soon and should have pursued things a little bit differently then?
You're going to get a lawyer's answer from me, Kenny. I think it's definitely too soon to know that for sure. I think we're still in the midst of fighting this pandemic. I think hindsight, 2020 hindsight, will be a fantastic thing, and I certainly hope that pandemic planning and pandemic preparations in Scotland, let alone in the UK, but Scotland in particular, are put in place in an even more robust manner than was the case when we came into this pandemic at the beginning of the year. So I think the Scottish Government and its advisors have done everything that they can do. I think the press has played a great part in trying to confect conflict and confect problems where there have been none. What I would say is that perhaps I think a slightly tentative approach to restricting travel across the border in the summer and not requiring airports to either close or to be better protected, I think that certainly plays a part. And I think with hindsight, it's possible that we will see that it's recognised that we should have been harder at that point. We should have insisted on the border being closed, and we should have insisted on either travellers arriving at airports being quarantined or the airports closing, one or t'other. So I hope we learn lots and lots of lessons from this pandemic, and that as a result we learn not to make the inevitable mistakes that will have happened. We learn not to make them in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We move on now to another aspect of health issues, and a planned investment of up to £114.5 million will ensure that cancer patients continue to have equitable access to care in NHS Scotland, regardless of where they live. The Cancer Recovery Plan will improve patients' experience of care and will roll out innovative treatments, many of which have been expedited by the pandemic, to improve cancer services. A total of 68 actions will be driven forward across 5 themes to both redesign cancer service and increase NHS Scotland's overall resilience to any future rises in coronavirus prevalence. So, Andrew, the NHS rather has made strides in cancer survival and generally cancer treatment, but sometimes the experience from start to finish isn't always the most fun. That's something that this is trying to help with. Do you think this is the right move for the NHS right now?
Yes, Kenny, I do. I think during the pandemic, we've seen steps in both the NHS in England and Wales and Scottish NHS to innovate and to deliver new ways of to develop new ways of delivering care in all parts of the health service, but cancer care in particular. And so we saw the health service collaborate successfully, I understand, with the private sector, with cancer surgery being transferred to Spire and other private hospitals, in order that facilities in NHS hospitals could be redeployed in the fight against COVID. So I think, and also I think I've seen myself, not in the context of cancer care, but in the context of emergency care, that the Scottish NHS continues to innovate, and in my experience, continues to innovate in a way that has been driven by practitioners and service users, patients, people is what they are, and so I think this initiative is another reflection of that approach that we have seen more and more of in our SNHS lately, and so it's to be encouraged in improving the equity of access to cancer care, in improving the manner in which cancer care is delivered, in increasing the amount of care care and personalisation in terms of the way in which cancer care is delivered in Scotland, I think is very important. And I think in this context, Jean Freeman's been very clear that the intention is to work across SNHS and the third sector, both of whom are fundamental to the delivery of to the development and delivery of cancer care in Scotland. And so if more money is being spent in a way that's coordinated and in a way that delivers innovation and as a result improves results and improves the experience of patients who, of course, will be in very difficult circumstances as it is, both mentally and physically, as they fight the disease. So I think this investment and delivered in this way is a significant step forward. It's not the only step. We will have to keep moving forward with this. Scotland has such a terrible history of the health impacts of poverty generally, of which cancer is one, and so we continue to keep taking these steps forward. But this step is particularly welcome at this point.
Now, we should point out these are actions all due to be rolled out by March 2023, but by the spring of next year, we're expecting to see 2 new early diagnostic centres. And just one of the things I wanted to bring up with you there, you mentioned the personalisation of services and this idea that there will be a single point of contact for patients to help manage them through their diagnosis and their treatment. That kind of personal contact with somebody can be really valuable. I mean, I don't know how many people you know that have been through a cancer diagnosis, but having somebody who kind of knows your whole case and knows your whole history and knows what you've been through already will make a big difference for a lot of people, won't it?
Yes, it will, Kenny. I think there is, to an extent, a degree of continuity in the leadership and the delivery of surgical care to cancer patients. I'm thinking of friends who have been through, in one case, repeated cancer diagnoses, and who built a very close relationship with the surgeons who were responsible for their care. However, allowing that approach to be adopted in other aspects of cancer care more generally, in order that there is a personalisation and there is a direct contact, I think is something that's really important. And I would like to see it be, in due course, be something that we see in other aspects of the delivery of healthcare. I know from other people who have complex or chronic conditions that a continuity of responsibility and a continuity in managing the delivery of that care is of course a great comfort to them. And if people are feeling comfortable in the way in which the care is being delivered, and they're not concerned about missing appointments or changes in personnel or those kind of things, if people are more comfortable in the way the care is delivered, I would like to think that gives their care a better chance of being successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just been handed a story here. Pfizer, the manufacturers of the vaccine that has just been released, and its German partner BioNTech said today that documents related to their development of a COVID-19 vaccine had been unlawfully accessed in a cyber attack on the European Medicines Agency. Pfizer and BioNTech said they did not believe any personal data of trial participants had been compromised, and the EMA has assured us that the cyber attack will have no impact on the timeline for its review. So that's interesting. I mean, we may have more on that tomorrow, but we'll move on with the show as was just now. And the Scottish Government has today published a consultation asking for views on the proposed new build heat standard. The new rules would mean all new build homes must have heating that produces zero direct greenhouse gas emissions, helping to meet climate change targets. The measures aim to ensure that heating systems in all new buildings given consent from 2024 are zero emissions, in line with the recommendations from the UK Committee on Climate Change that this is achieved from 2025 at the latest. The consultation sets out a range of outcomes for the standard to achieve, including ensuring new homes and non-residential buildings are affordable to heat, supporting the delivery of a continued supply of high-quality homes, and offers opportunities for retraining and upskilling workers to install zero emissions heating systems. So, Andrew, obviously this is a critically important thing, particularly in a country with Scotland's climate, as we try to reduce our impact on the environment, that we do have much more efficient ways of heating our homes. Do you think this is the right move here? Is this ambitious enough? Do you think it can be achieved?
I certainly think it can be achieved. Well, I certainly think there are the means to achieve it. Given that we're talking about building regulations, I am inevitably drawn back to one of my pet hobby horses, which is the threat to the Building Scotland regulations, which the Internal Markets Bill presents. And I am concerned that attempts to improve the sustainability and reduce the carbon footprint of both the construction of homes and the operation of homes, I am concerned that those initiatives will be under threat from the provisions of the Internal Market Bill, which will give an unelected quango in England the authority to overrule changes in building regulations in Scotland. So I am concerned that these initiatives are being taken against the prospect of them being undone by an unelected quango in England that has no understanding and has no wish to properly reflect the wishes and the priorities of the people of Scotland. I'm reminded also that, of course, if plans continue, the COP26 conference in Glasgow will be in the SECC, which I don't believe is heated in a particularly carbon-friendly or climate-friendly manner. I would certainly think that there is an opportunity there for the operators of the SECC and the Scottish Government to collaborate in the development and the implementation of some up to the minute technology. Heat sinks and heat pumps, for example, being beside the Clyde, which would provide a demonstration, a showroom for the way in which some of these technologies can be used to reduce the carbon footprint and to improve and to reduce the impact on negative impact on the climate. And so I think across the housing sector in Scotland, where a lot of construction is required, let's be under no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. But construction at the highest possible standards, and include environmental standards in that, is something that we really should aspire to. And that if we're able to do that, then we will see benefits from it, and also we will be able to demonstrate that Scotland's leading the way again in that arena.
Mm. Well, we move now to our final story, and more than 200 jobs are expected to be created through the development of a new deep water terminal in the Outer Hebrides. Initial work will begin on the Stornoway Deep Water Terminal, with Rural Economy Secretary Fergus Ewing confirming £49 million of investment from a number of partners to strengthen transport links and support a range of diverse industries in the Western Isles. The project includes a facility for berthing for cruise ships up to 360 metres long, a new deep water berth to cater for larger cargo vessels, and a freight ferry berth, berthing and unloading facilities for renewable energy components, and development land for a range of uses such as industrial processes and decommissioning. So, Andrew, does this sound like the kind of development that the Western Isles needs?
Yes, it does, Kenny, and I think that's in a number of ways. We have seen investment, often European money, used over the last 20 years to improve transport infrastructure, especially in the Western and Northern Isles. The construction of ferry terminals and the improvement of harbour facilities and berthing facilities. So this is a continuing development of a continuing expression of those themes, and it's welcome. I think also, I hope also, in a Scottish context and in a Celtic context, that we see a reappraisal and a return, perhaps, to the use of maritime transport both a return to more maritime transport and also a recognition that maritime transport has an important part to play in Scotland's economy and in the life of Scotland. Of course, that maritime industry has to be as green as possible, and we know that there are challenges in that respect. But I think whilst I don't think a deep water terminal will have much in the way of cruise liners for the next little while. That notwithstanding, I think the development of freight and the development of maritime transportation in the Hebrides and in the Northern Isles is very important. And I think there's a distinct possibility we'll see a move to more maritime transport from probably Rosyth or the ports on the east coast to the mainland of Europe as the Brexit debacle unfolds. And I think that if that is reflected in the continued enhancement in freight and transport and passenger maritime facilities in the Western Isles, then that's the right and proper thing to do, and it's a good thing to do.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much for that. That is just about all we have time for. So thank you, as I said, to Andrew, and thank you as well to Neil Gray for joining us for the first half of the show. And we're just sorry he couldn't be with us for the whole hour. But thank you as well for joining us. The shows would be pointless if you weren't watching, so thank you very much for that. As many of you will know, we're running a crowdfunder just now to try and raise money to employ some staff here at Broadcasting Scotland. We want to be able to afford a full-time editor and some full-time journalists. So if you're able to support that, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up as a regular supporter. Or you can go to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate if you would like to just make a one-off donation. You can also do us a big favour by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, by liking our Facebook page, by subscribing to our YouTube channel, and then sharing the shows around. Word of mouth is by far the best way for us to advertise, so do please help us with that if you can. And finally, if you would like to get involved, as I said, we are looking at some paid posts, but we will also be looking for more volunteers, especially when it comes to covering next year's election. So if you are interested in getting involved in any way whatsoever here at Broadcasting Scotland, please do give us a shout. But that is absolutely all we have time for. So once again, thank you to Neil Gray and to Andrew Wilson. Thank you again for joining us. Gordon will be here tomorrow at 7. I will be back on Friday at 7. But until then, thanks very much for joining us and have a great night.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.